In Module 9, we look at vSphere clusters. A cluster is an object in vCenter's inventory that allows us to take a group of ESXi hosts and aggregate their resources, and then on top of it layer a whole series of wonderful features that allows us to ensure reliability in the event of failure, that allows us to ensure good performance as we migrate virtual machines automatically around clusters, and gives us several other features as well. So we've talked a little bit about vSphere clusters and those cluster features like DRS and vSphere HA and enhanced vMotion compatibility. We've looked at that stuff already, but we're going to take a much deeper dive here in module number 9. All of these services that we are being asked to run require little to no unplanned downtime in order to keep our organizations running well. And so if there happens to be failures in hardware in the environment, we need some sort of mechanism or mechanisms to help us recover from those failures. Now, clustering applications themselves, that's a wonderful thing to do, so that the applications and the VMs running in those applications have eliminated single points of failure. But of course, that relies on the fact that the software that you're running has those features. It also relies on the fact that your ESXi hosts themselves don't have failures. And that's not a realistic thing to be able to do. So what happens if we do have a failure of hardware in our environment? How can we respond by taking the virtual machines that went down with that failed hardware and restarting them on other hardware that is in good operational order? How can we be sure, for example, that if we don't have any clustering features within our applications, that we can ensure sometimes 100% uptime in those virtual machines? Well, we have features around that, like vSphere fault tolerance. What about ensuring that all of the ESXi hosts and their virtual machines have enough available resources so that we can avoid contention? Well, that's what vSphere DRS will do for us by migrating virtual machines to ensure that the hosts that they're running on have plenty of resources to give to those virtual machines. So these are all of the topics that we are going to be looking at here in module number 9 across six different lessons. In lesson number 1, we're going to have a look at an overview of clusters. We'll look at what a cluster looks like in vSphere's inventory and explain that this is an aggregate of resources. In lesson number 2, we're going to look at this feature called vSphere DRS, which takes the aggregate of resources and uses the feature of vMotion to spread virtual machines around, ensuring that the virtual machines themselves have adequate access to physical hardware. In lessons 3, 4, and 5, we look at vSphere HA. That is the feature that will restart a virtual machine upon the failure of an ESXi host. Okay? Now, this isn't a vMotion feature. Remember, vMotion is a feature that takes a powered-on virtual machine and moves it from host to host. vSphere HA assumes that the VM is no longer powered on because the host itself had failed. So the VM has crashed now because the host has crashed. We're going to look at this across 3 different lessons. We'll get an introduction to HA that says, here's all the things that HA does. And then in lesson number 4, we're going to have a look at configuring looking at the architecture. How does vSphere HA do all of its stuff? Understanding how vSphere HA works ensures that we have configuration and maintenance done properly on a cluster. And then 5, we get to actually look at that configuration once we know how things work. Finally, in lesson 6, we're going to look at vSphere fault tolerance, which ensures 100% uptime in very specific circumstances where we mirror a virtual machine and its applications across a second ESXi host. Now, this feature isn't for everyone, and it's not for every scenario, but for certain highly critical applications that fit within, say, 4 virtual CPUs, we can actually mirror that virtual machine across multiple ESXi hosts and mirror those operations as well. Okay, so that's lesson number 6 on fault tolerance. All of these features should be used by everyone, okay, including, of course, our fictitious organization, Virtual Beans, and it should be used by you as well. Okay, so ensuring high availability in our infrastructure for business critical applications, for non-business critical applications, we can create service level agreements within our organization from IT that says we promise to the organization a certain percentage of uptime. That is non-planned, or the avoidance of unplanned downtime. Planned downtime doesn't fall into this. But we think that if we configure vSphere H8 properly, we can actually achieve 99.99 or 49% uptime in our applications. We also have to be able to scale. That is, if we run low on resources, adding new hosts to clusters and then balancing the load across those clusters using vMotion and the automated features of DRS are an important feature for us to have, so that all we have to do is pop a host in a rack, make sure it's all set up for vSphere, make sure it's got networking and access to storage and redundancies and VM kernel ports for vMotion, and then all we have to do is drag it into an a DRS cluster, and boom, workloads get migrated onto that ESXi host. And we have to make sure that those applications, once they land on the hosts, actually do perform well, that they get the resources that they need. So that is our job as a vSphere administrator in working with clusters. When we come back, we're going to have a look at what it is to create a cluster in lesson number 1. We'll talk to you very soon.